Welcome to the Hay Equipment Showdown. Today we're going to be talking about the best hay equipment for small farms. We're going to run through everything from mowers, tedders, rakes, balers, and a couple other items and everything you're going to need to know when starting your hay farm. We're not going to waste any time. First off is mowers. There's a couple different types of mowers out there. First one being a disc bind. Right behind me, I got a Case IH 3309 disc bind. A disc bind uses discs with knives on it and it spins at a very high RPM. It's able to cut really fast and it's able to cut a lot of thick stuff. So it's a high capacity, high tonnage, high speed type of mower. Disc binds and mower conditioners also use a system that conditions the hay. So when you cut the hay on the disc bind, when the discs cut the hay, it spits it out back through rollers. Now, different types of mowers have different types of conditioners. This particular one has a set of rubber rolls, which is just rubber rolls crimping the hay. Others have steel rolls, which is a more aggressive form of crimping. And then other mowers have flail knives, which again is just another form of conditioning the hay. Conditioning the hay is trying to crimp it and squeeze moisture out of it to allow for faster drying. So a mower conditioner or disc bind like this cuts really high speeds, high tonnage, spits it out the back conditioned, and it's utilized by most hay farms, dairy farms, that sort of thing. It's probably the most common type of mower you're going to see. Now, there's another type of mower called a disc mower. A disc mower is basically the exact same thing as this, just without the conditioning rolls. Going back in time, we're going to go back to hay binds. That's the next one. A hay bind is roughly the same size as this. It uses a sickle section that's oscillating very fast like this, and then it can have conditioning rolls on it as well. So it'd be like the super early version of a mower conditioner. Then even before the hay bind, we have the sickle bar mower. The sickle bar mower is exactly what it sounds like. It's a sickle bar, oscillates, cuts it, lays it over flat. So if you think about it, your sickle bar and your disc mower are basically kind of the same thing. They cut and lay it over. Whereas your hay bind and your disc bind cut it and condition it to allow for faster drying. So when it comes to purchasing a mower for your beginner hay farm, you got to think of a couple things. What kind of hay are you going to be making? How many acres are you going to be cutting? And what kind of horsepower do you have to pull the mower? So disc binds and mower conditioners require a lot more horsepower than hay binds and sickle bars. The reason being is they're spinning really fast, they're cutting at high speeds, and they can handle a lot of crop at once, plus you're spitting it through the rollers and crimping it. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this system that requires a lot more horsepower. Another thing you need to think about is what kind of hay are you going to be producing. Now, this may not be as big of a factor as some other ones. Are you going to be creating grass hay? If so, you could get away without having conditioning rolls. Now, if you're producing alfalfa, alfalfa has really thick, hard stems that do need to be crimped a little bit, so you should probably consider something with conditioning rolls. And then, of course, the final thing is acreage. Are you making 10 acres of hay or are you making 50 or 100 acres of hay? If you're making 100 acres of hay, you probably want a disc bind because you can travel a lot faster and you can cover a lot more ground. If you're making 10 acres of hay, you could get by with a hay bind or a sickle bar just fine. Okay, so you've asked yourself those questions. You probably have an idea of what you want to look at now. Now you got to think about price. So your disc bind and mower conditioner is going to be more expensive most of the time. So to put it in perspective, when I started farming back in 2021, I started by making around 10 acres of hay. That's what I started with. However, in my head, I knew that down the road, I was going to be working to expand the operation every single year. So I wanted something that I could handle a lot of hay quickly with. We did a lot of shopping and we managed to find this mower, the 3309, which is a really good mower. That's a very fair price mower, and it's a disc bind. We found it for $10,000 and we've used it for 3 seasons now. This past season, I mowed a couple hundred acres with it over the course of the year, and it's been a phenomenal mower. I've never had issues with it. So needless to say, I'm thankful that I got a disc bind because it has done really well for me. Paired with my International 966, which is roughly 100 horsepower, it works in perfect tandem. They're a perfect pair that does a really good job for me. I've mowed everything from short meadowgrass hay to heavy alfalfa to 6 foot tall Johnson grass. It does everything I need it to do and then some. So for our beginner farm, this disc bind, a 9-foot disc bind, was a perfect match. Moving on to tedders. Tedders is what dries down your hay or speeds up the drying process. This part is crucial when you are looking to make dry hay. If you are a dry hay maker specifically for the horse market, you've got to have that hay dry. It cannot have any mold, dust, or mildew. If it does, the price of that hay drops significantly, and it is just a deterrent to all the horse people. So you got to have dry hay. So how do you make dry hay? Well, first step is with the mowers. If you have conditioners on your mowers, you can speed up the drying process by crimping. But the next step is tedding. Now, it all depends on your climate. That's a big thing that some people don't realize. Western United States, they don't ted hay. It's such a dry climate. They have like no dew, no moisture in the air. They almost have to bale at night all the time just to keep leaves on the alfalfa. But around here in the East Coast and Midwest, I know, and Southeast, hot, humid climates. Summertime is super humid. It is impossibly difficult to make hay without a tedder. Now, it can be done, but it's hard. You got to have the right weather window. If you don't have it, you're screwed, which is why pretty much every farmer in this area who makes hay, not even dry horse hay, has a tedder. Tedders are simple machines when you think about it. You lay the hay on the ground with the mower and then you come through with this machine. This machine has a star. A star is this whole unit right here. It has a tine arm and tines. These stars all spin in tandem. They're timed correctly. They spin super fast, and they take the rows of hay, spit it out, spread it out, and allow the sun to shine directly on it and let the wind blow across it and blow through it. And those things are what helps dry down hay. Your biggest friend when making hay is the sun. Having a tedder to spread out the hay more evenly allows you to get that hay dried out quicker. Now, if you're making grass hay, ted it as many times you want to. Constantly keep that hay fluffed up, let the air blow through it, let the sun get on it. You'll dry hay down really quickly. Alfalfa, however, alfalfa is a tricky one. You don't really want to ted it more than once, because if you do, you're going to knock leaves off, and that's where you're going to start losing quality and money. So if you ask a lot of farmers, tedding is kind of one of those necessary evils. I would love to not have to ted stuff. It would reduce a pass in the field. It would reduce a machine cost. I wouldn't have had to buy this thing. I wouldn't have to, maintain it and grease it and do all that stuff with it. I wouldn't have to burn the fuel to drive it through the field and down to the fields and all that stuff. But with our climate, we just don't have the ability to do without it. Sometimes we do, but it's really difficult. Now, when it comes to tedders and purchasing a tedder for your small farm, there are so many options, and that's the cool thing. There's everything from 2-star tedders to like 24-star tedders. So you have endless options. For your small beginner farm, again, really just got to think about your acres that you're running. It doesn't really matter the crop type or your horsepower, because tedders do not really take any horsepower at all. This right here was my first tedder. This is a Krone 4-star tedder. I pulled this tedder with this tractor right here, which was 70 horsepower, and I also pulled it with my K730, which was about 50 horsepower. This tedder was able to ted 2 passes of my 9-foot disc bind, and it worked really well. This was a good tedder for me. Had a few odd things that happened to it. It was a used tedder, but we bought it for $4,000 back in 2021, and it's just been a really good tedder for us. It's always gotten the job done. Doesn't take a whole lot of horsepower, and they're relatively simple to hook up. You back up, hook the PTO up, put your pin in, you hook up one hose. That's about it. 4-star tedders are probably your most common tedder because they fold up easily. They're 4 stars. They get a lot of stuff done, but they're not too big, but they're not too small. So most guys are going to go a 4-star. If you're trying to do stuff on a really tight budget, go on the marketplace, find a 2-star or an old 4-star for $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, and you can get started making hay right away. There are a couple other ways to dry your hay. 2 machines that come to mind are the hay bob and like the hay fluffer. There's like a tedder fluffer thingy. It's just this big reel that flips it. I don't know. They both can be used to dry hay, so you may be able to find them cheaper than you can find a tedder. So you can keep that in mind when searching for hay equipment. Now we got to talk about rakes. There's a little bit more that goes into choosing rakes and what kind of rake you want. There are multiple different types of rake, the 3 main ones being rotary rake, wheel rake, and a roller bar rake. This here is a rotary rake. A rotary rake is a rake that spins at the center, has a bunch of arms and tines, and flips it to one side. This particular model is a single rotary rake, meaning it is just one rotor. They make doubles, triples, quadruples. They make massive rotary rakes, but they get expensive. The most common rotary rakes that we see around here, and the most common rakes actually that we see around here, are rotary rakes, specifically single and double rotary rakes. A wheel rake is a ground driven rake, as opposed to this one, which is PTO driven. The wheel rake is ground driven. So it has a bunch of wheels, like spiked wheels, and the teeth are designed so that when they make contact with the ground, they start spinning. These rakes are used a lot more in cattle hay production. The main reason being is that they tend to pull up rocks and dirt, and in the horse hay market, that's like a no-no. However, there are a lot of guys that do use wheel rakes and they still get the job done. The big plus of wheel rakes is they are very fast machines. They're very simple machines, and there's not a lot of complexity to them. The reason we see so many rotary rakes around the area is because they create a very nice fluffy windrow. They are very gentle and delicate with the hay, and they don't rake up dirt and rocks and debris like wheel rakes do. Those are kind of your 2 larger production hay rakes. The most common one that you'll see on kind of smaller farms is the roller bar rake. A roller bar rake is a rake that has 2 discs on either end, and there's a bunch of bars with tines on them, and it kind of spins in kind of an oval like circle, as you can see in this video. These rakes were super common way back in the day, and this was the kind of rake that everybody had back in the day. And the reason being is roller bar rakes, kind of like wheel rakes, are super simple to work on. They're easy machines, ground driven, so there's no like hydraulics and PTO. You can find them anywhere. So for cost comparison, a rotary rake like the one sitting over there, the one that we bought for $7,000. That's a fair price. I feel like you could probably buy a lot of different rotary rakes, used rotary rakes, 10, 15, 20 years old, for that price. price. Obviously, the newer you get, the more expensive you're going to get, and the bigger you get, the more pricier it's going to get. Today's day and age, if you were to buy a good used double rotary rake, you're looking at about $20,000 to $25,000, maybe 15 on the lower end, but that's kind of the price range you're looking at for these rotary rakes. Now, they're expensive like that because they do a really nice job of making hay. Even that one over there is 15 years old, and we've done a lot of work to it, and it makes a really nice windrow. A wheel rake is kind of going to be in about the same price range roughly. There's pros to wheel rakes over rotary rakes, and there's cons to wheel rakes over rotary rakes. But again, you're kind of looking at about the same price range. I personally never have priced any out. And then the third one is the roller bar rake. The roller bar rake you can get as cheap as $500 if you want to get a really kind of beat up one and you want to put a lot of work into. And you can get one as much as $5,000 if you want to get a really nice New Holland roller bar rake. Again, roller bar rakes are going to be your cheapest one, but they're super simple. They do a pretty good job. The one thing that I do love about roller bar rakes is they are super gentle on alfalfa. Wheel rakes are not very gentle depending on the type of crop and the speed you're running. Rotary rakes are pretty gentle for the most part. They're pretty good all-around rakes, but the roller bar really excels in alfalfa because it just picks it up and just gently rolls it over. So if you're doing alfalfa, look into a roller bar rake. If you're doing multiple kinds of stuff, look into rotary rakes. And if you're kind of looking to do larger scale, maybe just cattle hay, look into wheel rakes. However, this video is for the small farm hay equipment. So if it was my opinion, I would look into an older rotary rake or roller bar. And one other thing, just because I have a feeling someone will mention in the comments, there is this thing called a merger. It's not necessarily recommended for dry hay. It's more used in the wet hay, silage, wrapped hay kind of area. I guess if you really wanted to, you could probably merge dry hay. It might just not work the best, but it's another tool that is used to bring hay into rows. The last thing you got to figure out is your baler. What kind of baler are you going to do? What kind of bales are you making? All that kind of stuff. Now, let's talk first. What kind of hay are you going to be making? This is a question that we talked about when talking about mowers. You got to kind of figure out what kind of hay you're going to be making in your market almost before you really make this decision. So for me, when I started making hay back in 2021, I had to think about what kind of hay am I making and what's my market. We had steers. And before we started making hay, we hired someone to do all the haymaking and we big baled all of it to feed to our steers. However, when we started making hay, we wanted to make this into a business. And talking to other farmers and looking at the market, we realized that horse hay, specifically small bales, seems to be a really good route to go, especially, and hear me out, because the cost to get into small bales is a little bit cheaper than large square bales. If you are going for the small bale market, the small bale horse market, there are endless options for small square balers, and there's a lot of options for really affordable prices. You could go onto Facebook Marketplace and find a used New Holland old square baler for $1,500, $2,000. Now, obviously, you're going to get what you pay for in some of these deals, especially on Marketplace. Some of these things are going to really need some real work, but you can find a lot of small square balers that are in that under $5,000 region. If you want to go more in depth about small square balers, you could talk about newer balers, high density balers, bale density, all that kind of stuff, but we probably don't have to worry about that in today's video because we're just talking about small farms and making basic small bales. Now, if you don't want to do small bales and you're probably doing hay maybe for your own cattle or someone else's cattle and you want a cheap option to get into kind of bulk hay production, you can look at round balers. Round balers make a round bale. Now, if you have a round baler, you're going to need something to pick up the bales too. So you may need a skid loader or a front end loader. Maybe that's something you already have. Maybe that might be another expense that you have to think about adding on. Round bales. This one right here is a 4x5, meaning it makes a 4-foot by 5-foot bale. You can also get balers that are 5x5 or 4x4. For you guys who are probably starting out making hay, look into 4x4 round balers. You can get 4x4 round balers, lots of options for $5,000 to $10,000. There are pros and cons to all of these balers and bale types. For example, round bales is bulk hay. When someone buys a round bale, they're buying 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of hay per bale, meaning they're buying in bulk. Normally, when you buy in bulk, you're buying in wholesale, meaning it's going to be cheaper per ton than small bales. Small bales are normally going to bring a premium per ton because of the smaller package and so on and so forth. However, small bales, there's oftentimes a lot more work that goes into small bales. So even though there's a premium for small bales, you're not necessarily always making more profit, net profit, than round bales. Sometimes you are though. The third kind of baler, and this may be pretty far out there for some people, it's far out there for me, that is a large square baler. Large square balers are pretty big honking machines, and they make 3x3 big squares, meaning they're 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep, and around 7 feet long. You can make 3x4s, which are 3 feet deep, 4 feet wide, and roughly 7 to 8 feet long. Or you can make 4x4s, which are 4 feet wide, 4 feet deep, about the same length as well. Those balers can cost anywhere from $10,000 to $250,000. I have no idea. They can be really expensive nowadays. For the small farm, look into 4x4 round balers. and older $5,000 to $10,000 square balers, that's probably going to be your best option. Again, you got to understand what kind of hay are you making, what's your market, and then you can kind of go from there. So at the end of the day, you have to look at your budget. Before you do all this stuff, make sure you have a budget. When you're making that budget, make sure that you take into all these factors and considerations. What kind of hay are you making? What is your target audience? Where are you selling it? Who are you selling it to? All these things play a big factor. How much hay are you planning on making? How big is your operation going to be? How do you see the future of your operation playing out? Do you want to stay at 5 or 10 acres of hay? Is this just a hobby? Do you want to expand this into 100 acres in 5 years? You got to think of those things, plan your budget accordingly, and stick to your budget. And the biggest advice I can give you about farming is track every little piece of information that you can. I don't care if it is this random $1 that you spent on a whoopie pie at the Amish stand. Track every little thing that you were doing on the farm, every expense, everything that's going on, track it, write it down, monitor it. This is going to help you make data-driven decisions when it comes to growing or just operating your farm, and it's going to prevent you from basically making bad decisions. It's going to reduce the risk a lot more. Farming itself is already a huge risk and a huge gamble, and we need to take advantage of every little advantage that we can get. So tracking your data and that sort of stuff is important. So make sure you have a good business plan and a good idea of what you're getting into. Plan your budget accordingly and do your best to stick to that budget. I highly encourage you guys to do your own research, look into all this stuff yourself, look into the different types of mowers, look into different tedders, look into different rakes, look into different balers, read forums, do research on what other guys are saying. Don't just take my word for it. Don't just listen to what I'm telling you, because I'm one guy that lives in southeastern PA. It is totally different for the guy that lives in Arizona, the guy that lives in Minnesota, the guy that lives in Florida. So depending on where you're at is also going to play a huge factor in all these decisions that you're making. So do your own research. I highly recommend that you read forums and just ask questions. Don't be afraid to be the guy that's asking questions on YouTube in the comments or on a forum, or talk to other farmers. Don't be the guy that's afraid, because the guy that thinks he knows everything is really the guy that knows nothing. Be the guy that's curious. Be the one that's going to ask questions. In the long run, you're going to know a lot more about making hay than the guy that's not asking questions. That's my advice to you. Leave a comment down below what your guys' thoughts are. What are your thoughts on all this equipment? What are you guys using on your operation? And what advice can you give to the next guy who's making hay? Leave it down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. We will see you in the next one.